Chapter 20. Eggs and Feathers. Wally had come across another notice. There never was such a boy for them. Strictly speaking, it wasn't a notice board, but a signpost. It had 4 arms pointing in 4 different directions, and of course Wally had to read them all. One arm ran, bears, lions, wolves, antelopes, sea lions, etc. "We've seen the bears," began Wally, ticking off the names on his fingers. "And the lions, and the wolves. No, we haven't seen the wolves." Here was a discovery. And they were all so fond of the story of Little Red Riding Hood. "Well," said Uncle, "they won't take us long. But neither have we seen the hippopotamus, nor the giraffe, nor the rhinoceros, nor, ever so many others. In fact, there's one whole section of the gardens that we haven't even set foot in yet." "Where?" "Through the tunnel." The tunnel. Fancy there being a tunnel in the zoo. "I want to see the tunnel," said Kitty. She was very tired, but the others seemed so excited about the tunnel that she felt sure it must be an animal of more than ordinary interest. "I'm afraid you won't care much for it," said Uncle, laughing. "Kitty's mistake reminds me of the story of the egress. Have you ever heard it?" "No," said everyone. "A famous showman once took his menagerie to a big town where the people believed in getting plenty for their money. Having looked round, some of the folks began to kick up a row, declaring they had been swindled. They were even beginning to knock things about when a notice was suddenly displayed. 'This way to the egress.' You know what an egress is?" "No," said Phil. "Well, it isn't a bird. These people thought it was a female egret, or eagle, perhaps. They rushed round the corner to see the new wonder and found themselves outside the gate. If the showman had put up 'way out, the result would have been somewhat different." "We don't want to see the egress yet," said Phil, unless you're tired." Uncle certainly did look rather pale. "I'm inclined to think we're all a little tired. Besides, it will be closing time before very long. Suppose we just see a few more friends in that part of the gardens and leave the tunnel and the otters," put in Wally. "Yes, the otters, if you like, but I was going to say the rest for another day." "Hurrah!" cried Phil, and somehow the fact that it was quite settled that they were to come again made them enjoy the rest of the day still more. Even Kitty grew lively again, though that may have been the effect of the glass of lemonade she had, made from real lemons. They didn't go straight to the wolf's house, because there were a number of interesting creatures to be seen on the way. That's the worst of the zoo. You never can go straight to anything. The first obstacle was the ostrich, and it proved a pretty big one. A bird that stands 8 feet high is not easily got over. When you see a large number of ostriches together, as you do on the big ostrich farms in South Africa, said Uncle, they look at a distance remarkably like a body of soldiers. They run and wheel and turn in concert, as if they were being drilled by a sergeant. Moreover, when in movement they raise just such a cloud of dust as does a column of troops. Has anybody ever seen the ostrich's egg?" "Yes," said Phil rather hotly. "You sent one home once, and Dad—" "Of course, I had forgotten. And you have it hanging over the mantel-shelf in your room." "Yes," agreed Phil, trying hard not to show his disappointment. That ostrich's eggs had been the greatest treasure of his life. The most awful pains and penalties had been threatened to any of the others who dared to touch it, and only once, as a special mark of favour, had even Wally been allowed to have it in his hands. As for Hannah, she was caught one day trying to dust it, high time too, and Phil almost insisted that she should be court-martialled and shot on the spot. And then Uncle wanted to know if anyone had seen an ostrich's egg. Well, the ostrich is the biggest of birds, and the egg corresponds. In fact, it weighs about 3 pounds. Of course yours is only the shell, Phil, and you could get 17 or 18 ordinary breakfast eggs into it. An old friend of mine in South Africa told me that he once tried to hard-boil an ostrich's egg. How long do you think it took? Everybody looked at Alice. She ought to know. Mother always says 3.5 minutes for a hen's egg. No, interrupted Phil. It's all runny then. Hannah always gives mine 4. I like 'em hard-boiled, same as a picnic, came a voice from the back. It was Harold. He had scarcely spoken all the afternoon, and they had almost forgotten he was with them. Well said, Harold, cried Uncle. Spoken like a man and a Briton. But how would you like to wait 40 minutes for it? The children looked at the ostrich in a new light. Will he lay an egg tonight? Asked Kitty. Uncle laughed. I'm afraid he doesn't lay eggs. That department is run by Mrs. Ostrich. But Mr. Ostrich has to help in hatching them, and most observers say that he always sits on the eggs by night, and his wife carries on by day. But often he has more than one wife, so sometimes there will be as many as 20 eggs in the nest. It must be a whopping nest, said Phil. I don't know what Mrs. Sparks would have said to such language, but Uncle did not seem to notice. Oh, it isn't really a nest, but a hole scooped out in the sand, and at night you simply don't see a sitting bird because the white feathers in the tail and under the body are quite concealed. It is these feathers, by the way, that ladies prize so highly for their hats. A really choice one costs a great deal of money. It is only the male ostrich who has them. The lady ostriches are not nearly so smart. Indeed, you will find practically all through nature, as in the case of the lion and the peacock, that the males are the more handsome creatures. Of course, said Wally, with a wink at Alice, but Phil was inclined to think the matter over. At that age, he would have punched the head of any boy or girl who dared to tell him he was handsome. But it's different with us, isn't it? Said Joan. Mustn't say, answered Uncle, but talking about feathers reminds me. The ostrich and its relation that you see here, the rhea of South America, the emu and the cassowary of Australia, and the kiwi of New Zealand are remarkable because although they are birds, they cannot fly. They all have wings, said Wally. Yes, but they can't or don't use them. That is another great law of nature, that what a creature doesn't use, it is sure in time to lose. The ostrich has developed its legs. It is a champion runner, and has been known to do 26 miles an hour. And its wings have become useless, though it sometimes employs them in a favouring wind as sails. In a similar way, creatures who live in dark caves, and hence do not use their eyes, become in time sightless. And if little boys and girls do not use their brains, and their senses, and their muscles, they must not expect to keep them. That is why you have lessons and games and exercises. The children rubbed their eyes. Was it? Miss Sparks speaking. She had often said the same sort of thing, only differently. There must be something in it. Suppose a boy hasn't any brains to start with, like Wally, said Phil. Of course after that there had to be a fight. but uncle took no notice and went on. I ought to have told you something else about ostriches' eggs, and that is that they make splendid basins for water, for they are fairly strong and will easily hold 5 pints. The bush people sometimes fill them and bury them in the sands on an outward journey to be sure of having a supply of water on the way home. The bird is easily tamed, but can also be a very fierce fighter. You would certainly not like a kick from that powerful leg, to say nothing of a scratch from that very long toe. I have even heard of an old bird charging a goods train at full speed. One of the funniest sights it is possible to witness is an ostrich waltz. Waltz? Echoed Alice, who had just finished her first term of dancing lessons. Yes, they waltz beautifully, extending their wings, swinging backward and forward, and making a peculiar clicking noise by striking the ribs on each side alternately with the back of the head. Possibly some of the noise may be due to the contents of their stomachs, for they swallow the most extraordinary things, including large quantities of pebbles, and any oddments they can come across, like old nails, coins, bits of glass, etc. J.G. Wood, a famous naturalist, said he once helped to dissect an ostrich's stomach, and discovered, in addition to many pebbles, a tolerably large piece of deal and a considerable portion of a brickbat. "I like ostriches," said Joan, as they passed along to the stalks, "except the way they look at you." "You'd be too hard for them anyway," said Phil. Harold stole round to her quietly. He was too shy ever to stand up to Phil. "I think you're nice and soft," he said. Joan wondered whether to be pleased or hurt. All she said was, "So are you."